Empowering Developers with Danny Vandergriff.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your humble host. And make sure to check out www.azuredevops.show for the past episodes and show notes. And I am super excited that people are taking me up on my open invitation to speak virtually at your .NET user groups. It's been a lot of fun, and if you run a .NET user group, I'd love to get on your schedule. And if you're tuning in for the first time to the podcast, the Azure DevOps Podcast is for developers shipping software with Microsoft technologies. We talk about every topic under that umbrella, and my goal for all development teams is that you are able to move fast, deliver quality, and run your systems with confidence. And if you have some specific issues you'd like help with, that's what we do as an architecture company at ClearMeasure. And my guest on the show today is Danny Vandergriff. He is a Principal DevOps Architect here at ClearMeasure, designing DevOps solutions for clients in a variety of industries. He's also done a tremendous amount of work in the area of database administration for large and complex SQL Server databases. Danny, welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jeffrey. Hey, I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, for the guests or for the listeners, maybe not familiar with you, what's been your background where you kind of gotten into the current role, and what made you even want to get into all this techie stuff?
Well, the DevOps architect role here at ClearMeasure is maybe a little bit different than a lot of the software architects that we have. And that's because really for me, I come from a sysadmin and operational background. I really enjoy getting dirty with the infrastructure and knowing what's happening with the operations and, working through automation, code deploy and release, monitoring, all those kinds of things that software developers generally hate doing. I love it. So because of the fact I love doing all this kind of stuff, it gets me involved in a lot of different projects at ClearMeasure. So we have some fun opportunities to use those skills.
There's been a lot of, I think, ongoing talk in the DevOps community about the boundary or the synthesis of dev and ops. And I hear a lot of developers talk about DevOps a certain way, as if DevOps is DevOps. And then you hear about DevOps. I hear about DevOps from an ops perspective, where the ops people keep on saying about those devs. So what's the deal?
Well, you really can't have one without the other. So, the operations team, they generally, it's just like you said, it's always been a fence, and people throw things over the fence at each other. And that is all really beginning to break down with a lot of the new tech stack that's out there and that we get to take advantage of. What you end up with are a lot of tools where the developers and the development teams are able to self-serve. They're able to administer and manage the environments that run the software that they write. And so it's a real new world out there. Seems like a lot of the younger people are really into it, and they don't even realize that they're doing it because it's just such a natural part of the way that the technology has moved in the last few years. It's really the older guys that say, well, I'm a server admin, I'm a network guy. And then there's, the software development teams that work in their specific languages. So definitely the fence is being knocked down, and it's pretty seamless. It's become a really nice space to work.
That's a good point. The old fogies even keep on talking about the Agile Manifesto, which is 20 freaking years old. I mean, most of the people in the industry, they weren't around before Agile. They're like, why do we even care about non-Agile? And same thing with DevOps. The term was coined in 2010. More than half the developers in the industry were not in the industry in 2010. So it's like, well, what do you mean non-DevOps? Isn't this just how? I mean, we run what we build, we support what we build. What do you mean some people don't?
Yep. It's just second nature for most people now.
That's awesome. So let's get into some of the things that you've done and you've learned. We were just talking briefly before the show, and of course the listeners here are all shipping and delivering software built on Microsoft technologies, and there's so many out there, but tends to be that every business system still has, and will for some time to come, it's just kind of part of it, a central SQL Server database for an application, or many SQL Server databases. And when people are moving to Azure or getting a new one built up, there's always some things that tend to be gotchas. What have you learned when designing and implementing SQL databases for business applications?
What we find a lot is there's almost always room for optimization. A lot of applications, they may get reskinned every so often, but the database, the underlying persistence layer just stays the same, and it gets really stale because it works, and people are really hesitant to make any kind of changes to it. So whenever you have an application like that, a lot of times they don't support, what are kind of more modern methodologies, things like multi-tenancy, and you have to basically, refactor what the database looks like in order to work with a modern application. So I guess that's probably one of the biggest pitfalls I've seen.
Okay. If people are starting new applications today, is it more common to put the database on a VM or to use the Azure SQL service?
The Azure PaaS is is such a great option. For a long time, whenever you went into Azure and you were, picking out new Azure SQL databases, there was some limited functionality there. And it was frustrating in some ways, because whenever you run a headless version of I guess a serverless version of Azure, all you're really getting to access is the database itself. And, for the, again, kind of the old school, but the DBA types, they want to go in and they want to be able to see what's happening in the SQL engine itself and be able to manage it. And you didn't have any access to be able to do that. So in the last couple of years, they've released Azure SQL managed instances, which is effectively like having access to the SQL Server itself. So you can query things like dynamic management views and things under the hood that you didn't get a chance to before. So you're able to optimize, you're able to tune, and then Azure, obviously it also it kind of gives you some help. It helps you to identify the places where you have performance problems, and helps you walk through those. So yeah, the tool has really gotten great in the last few years. It's really made things easy for the developers to not have to be DBAs and to get really good performance out of it.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said those DBA types, but from your background, you were and still are the DBA type, right?
Oh, sure.
I mean,
sure.
There's a lot, but not every developer deals with databases where single tables are multiple terabytes large, and you have.
I have, yeah, and a lot of those were in availability groups. There's an old school term, but spanning multiple data centers throughout the country. So, yeah, those can get pretty complex, pretty hairy.
So with Azure SQL, you don't have every bit of SQL Server like you would if it was installed on the cluster. But what concepts do you literally not have to think about anymore? Like, I'm thinking database file groups, but kind of give us the rundown.
Sure. So one of the obvious things is that you don't actually have to manage the server itself. You don't have to keep up with Windows operating system patches and security vulnerabilities. All of that is managed by them, by Microsoft in the background. You're always at the most recent version of the offering, and you're able to take advantage of any SQL Server functionality and do it without, basically do so with just a number of checkboxes whenever you configure the database itself. It's really simple.
Now, what is this DTU concept? How do you best explain when you have to have that slider bar in Azure? Give it, how many DTUs do we need?
Yeah, a database transaction unit. So that's kind of an interesting concept. It's mostly around the CPU and memory. But there are other constraints that they don't tell you about that you're also sliding up and down whenever you move that little slider bar. And it's not only disk I/O, so your I/O will actually increase as you increase the number of DTUs, and also the number of available connections to your database will also increase as you slide that. So that's one of those things it's not that it's not documented, but it's buried in the documentation. So definitely the more DTUs that you're paying for, you're getting more performance in many ways.
Okay. And that you know of, is there any way to auto scale the DTUs like there is in app service?
No, it whenever you slide the database DTU, it will reconfigure the database itself, which means it will be brought offline temporarily.
Okay. All right. So that's a little bit more than just scaling up an app service. Now, when you're in Azure SQL, you're not in a cluster that you control. How do you think about disaster recovery and availability and managing different regions? Well,
whenever you have Azure SQL, all of the backups are managed for you. And so depending on the pricing tier that you're paying for, that will determine how far back you can go and how fast any database restores take place. So again, it's one of those things where the more you're paying for it, the faster you'll be able to get your database back online if you have any issue. And also the further back you can go if you need. So it's really interesting. I have actually come to where I trust what Microsoft is doing with all their backups. You can really get it down to the second what point in time you want the database to be restored to. So that means you really don't have to manage your backups like you used to in an on-prem SQL environment.
You've also been doing quite a bit of work in load testing, not just for SQL Server databases, but for complex systems. We know that Microsoft kind of deprecated their built-in Visual Studio load test solution, kind of recommended some industry standards, but is there a go-to process that .NET developers should be looking at for load testing their applications?
Microsoft is recommending BlazeMeter now for load testing. So that's basically a harness for the test that you write. And definitely what we've been doing here at ClearMeasure and have very good success with is creating tests in JMeter and executing them using BlazeMeter. It's really just an awesome tool set. You end up with really great, easy to write tests, and the results, you have beautiful graphs. BlazeMeter, the UI for it is first of all, it's really simple to navigate, but you end up with very useful visualizations of how your tests went. You can see if your graphs are smooth. You can see where you all of a sudden basically you maybe exhausted the number of SQL connections. Hey, that's my database background. And then whenever you do that, all of a sudden you're getting 500s, and the test basically goes all downhill from there. You don't want to see that, but it does happen. So anyway, that's a tool set that we really enjoy using is JMeter in combination with BlazeMeter.
So how should a developer get started? Someone who's literally never done any kind of load testing before. Do they need to write some scripts, or is it just a tool? You click on the wizard?
It will actually generate the test for you. It's really easy. What you'll want to do is you'll have JMeter running in the background, and it will monitor as you navigate through the UI of your website that you're wanting to test. And it will follow all along every command that you're giving it. And then once you've basically finished the test case that you want, you can save the file off and you can make any minor changes to it. You end up with basically it's an XML document that you can modify. And then at that point, you've now got your JMeter test ready to go.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Do you know about how much it costs?
It is a little bit expensive, and there are some limitations. BlazeMeter being the test harness, it runs out of cloud environments, so you can run from anywhere in the world. And obviously, the more locations that you want to run from, and the more agents that you want running in each data center, the more you're going to have to pay for the tests. And they do cap it at something like 10,000 requests per minute. And that's so that they don't, run out of their own connections. They don't exhaust their own connections. So yeah, it's really not a terribly expensive solution. It's not free, but it's not terribly expensive, and it's very worthwhile. Load tests are really important to understand where you're hitting bottlenecks in your system.
Yeah, one thing, you tell me if you disagree, but it seems like for any new application, until it's been either formally load tested or actually used in a fully loaded production environment with a bunch of people, until one of those events happens, it doesn't scale. No application scales to the point it needs to the first time, just out of the box. Am I wrong about that?
Oh, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. The developers, everybody thinks that they did it right, and they look really coy at first, and then all of a sudden the test begins to fire off, and you see that, yeah, it's doing okay for a little while, and then things need to happen. Just like you said, things need to scale up. All of a sudden, you've got app services that are spawning new ones, and then performance begins to go down while things are restarting and things are warming up, and then your site performance is not good. So we absolutely recommend that you do a thorough load test of your production environment before going live on any greenfield application. You should do that.
Awesome. Now, you've also done a whole heck of a lot of build and deploy work. What's the landscape of those tools today, and how do you think about the different approaches, and just any rules of thumb emerged?
Yeah, there are quite a few. Yeah, so obviously we're a Microsoft partner, and we love using Azure DevOps. Well, for a lot of things. First of all, it's a Git repo, build and release pipelines, artifacts. These things are really important. And one thing that it will do is your release pipeline will deploy to Azure, and it will deploy to an on-prem data center, and it does so beautifully. But what we found, though, is that whenever you have really complex environments, especially VM-centric environments, that we really love using Octopus Deploy for those deployments. It just really tends to work out better for us. It simplifies some of the way that you utilize environment variables and templates and scripts. You can have all these kinds of things stored off in Octopus Deploy, and it really works well. And then whenever you have an environment where you have a lot of PaaS offerings, and or things like Kubernetes, start using containers out there. We really like using Terraform for a lot of that stuff, because you can be very granular in your control of how the environment scales, and it does so appropriately. We really, whenever you get into complex serverless infrastructure, then Terraform is probably our go-to for that.
Now, you name dropped something interesting, Kubernetes. And now for the .NET developers that maybe haven't used Kubernetes, and they're thinking, wait a minute, Kubernetes, does that mean I'm going to Linux, or am I using Windows containers? How well does the current state of .NET applications and Kubernetes? Any rough edges, or does it just work now?
Tends to just work now. The latest versions of all these tools are really good. There definitely there's always a nuance with every tool that you're going to use, and there's always a learning curve associated with it. But at this point, I think that maybe it's just us. Maybe here at Clear Measure we just have a really good handle on it, but we're not really running into a lot of issues with dealing with containers.net.
Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear, because I think I remember many years ago, containers were really pushed at some of the conferences, and then I know I was trying to get stuff to work, and it just wouldn't work, and so it's been a long road.
Yeah, I would say it just seems like a lot of the issues that we see are around how your containers want to scale, and having them do so appropriately. They can, you can end up with a lot of problems if you have a lot of events. You really want to try to minimize the number of scaling events if you can, because your application will be much more stable if you do that.
Okay. It needs to kind of settle in and just run.
Just let it run. Yep. Be sized appropriately.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, getting back to the build and deploy tools, there's a lot of people that are using TeamCity. What's your opinion there? How has TeamCity come along into the cloud world?
TeamCity, I have a love-hate relationship with TeamCity. We use a lot, and it is great, and it's really powerful. It's a really powerful tool, and we use it in a lot of ways. We have a lot of integrations with it, so it's always it's an excellent tool for CI, and it's an excellent tool for running tests, for all of your integration tests and unit tests. So having it do those and having it log those is really powerful, especially whenever you have a large team. They all need to be able to go to a central place and be able to kind of evaluate what's the current status of the build pipeline. And TeamCity, there's really nothing better than that. It's just it's a really good tool for that. We love its integrations with, obviously, Visual Studio. So it's hooked up to your repository. So it's keeping tabs on any changes that take place. And then as soon as it sees anything's been committed, it will automatically kick off a CI build, make sure that your build pipeline is in the green. And if it's not, then it'll alert everybody. TeamCity is a great tool. Yeah. The look and feel is kind of old.
Yeah. Are they working on a hosted version?
I've heard they are, but we haven't begun using it yet.
Yeah. Okay. And of course, when we're thinking about the world of DevOps, there's a whole bunch of dev topics: building the software, getting it running, getting it out to the users, and now people are using it in production. There's the ops topics. Well, you got to know what it's doing. What kinds of tools and methods should people be thinking about just monitoring and supporting the applications running in production?
Well, there's quite a few things that a lot of it has to do with the kind of infrastructure that you're using for your environment. So we like a lot of the sort of third-party APM tools. We've been using New Relic for many years. Datadog, we've been using that to really good results. There's many of them out there, and there are some. Since we were talking about containers, there's some container somewhat specific tools out there for monitoring the health of those. So it's really important, though, that you stay on top of the health of your infrastructure. You want to know before your end users are experiencing problems that you're about to come up on something, and then you can be proactive. You can see that every day that you're getting a big bump in throughput, let's say, and then you can kind of dig into it and you can understand what it is that's causing all that. And maybe there's a legitimate reason and maybe there's not, but you definitely need to keep tabs if you're going to be responsible for your environment. It's important that you always know the health of your infrastructure and the health of your application.
So what is, because I know everybody always asks about tools. You've used them all, but if you're going to start a new application, do you have a few favorites? If you could just kind of choose and not be bound by constraints?
New Relic, I think that would probably be my favorite one. They've really come a long way in the last couple of years. They've got some better monitoring for serverless infrastructure, so you can monitor the health of your functions. And it also, recently, they've begun centralized logging. So you can actually now, a lot of these other tools, for a long time, that was the big weakness of New Relic, is that it didn't have any way for your application logs to be stored. But they've recently come out with that, and we've been using that to great success. They have their own query language, NRQL, and once you get tabs on that, then any query that you can come up with, you can slice and dice data, and then all you have to do, the UI is so easy to deal with. You just drag and drop these queries into a dashboard, and bang, you've got a graph there that every day, whenever you get to work, you can take a look at your all of your KPIs can be in the same place, and you can keep tabs on, all the environment that you're responsible for.
That's a good point. You mentioned querying the logs or having the logs available. I think a lot of people listen to this call are still used to, or listen to this podcast are used to using their administrative credentials and going into the production environment to find that information.
Yeah, we want to discourage that. If you're logging on to actual Windows servers if you know the names of all your Windows servers, these are kinds of things that are kind of the old sysadmin way of looking at things, I would say. So the DevOps way is that you really want your environment to the point where you don't ever have to log into a server and look at what's happening there locally. You don't have to look at Windows Event Viewer. You don't have to look at your application logs. You don't have to go into the IIS logs. All of those should be captured. All that should be telemetry that is being centralized, so that you can take a look at every single piece of infrastructure in your environment and holistically, and be able to evaluate what's happening in the system. The big picture instead of just one server at a time.
Yeah. There's, I don't know, I can't tell you how many times in the past where I was doing something and you tend to have probably more administrative access than you ever want, and I've worked that too. And then realizing how close I am, where if I made a mistake, if I overlooked something, really bad things would happen, and because I'm working so close to the edge, and that's not a good place to be.
It's not. You should make it easy on yourself.
Right.
And you should also make it so that you don't have access to do dangerous things to your infrastructure.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be going in and making registry edits to, production web servers.
I guess that principle is not really cloud or DevOps. That's pretty old. Going back to SQL Server, I remember when to do a support ticket, you had to do an update statement in production, right? Like in SQL Management Studio, and the old trick where you're doing your select statement to make sure your where clause is exactly right, joining against the right tables, and then comment out the select and have the update swap it out, so there's no room for error. And when I came across the technique of logging into SQL Server Management Studio with a read-only SQL Server account, just to have that feeling of safety to craft the right where statement. It wasn't even possible that I could modify any data while I was figuring out what I was doing, and then surgically, okay, now I'm treading on thin ice as I make this update statement.
Oh yeah, well, that'll give you false confidence. You may think that you're logged in as your read-only user, and then but it could be a disaster if you're not.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, hey, we covered quite a bit in this time. Is there anything else that development teams looking to increase quality and deliver their software better should kind of think about? Anything on your mind?
Yeah. I think that really, if I left any impression on any of these folks, I would say that getting your monitoring and your alerting and notifications up to snuff is really, really, really critical. And those are the kinds of things that you may spend time configuring all that, and then it ends up saving you so much time in the long run, and it makes you look so good whenever there's a problem and you find it before anyone else does. You're the star, and that's how you want to be perceived. So definitely, get your monitoring game up to level up on that. And you'll be the hero whenever you find a problem before it's really a problem.
Awesome. Well, hey, Danny, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Sir, thank you, Jeffrey. I appreciate it.
And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.